Hello, welcome all to our 2024 King County Point in Time Unsheltered Findings webinar. Sit tight, we're going to give folks a minute or two to join us, but we're happy for you to be here today, and we'll get started shortly. Welcome. If you're just joining us, we're going to get started with our 2024 King County Pit Unsheltered Findings webinar in just about a minute or two. Grab some coffee, grab some water, do a stretch, whatever you need to do, and we're going to get started just around 11:03. Welcome. Thanks for being here. I see people trickling in. We're so happy you could spend this morning with us. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We just want to make sure we're using the best of everybody's time. And so welcome to our 2024 King County Point in Time Unsheltered Findings Deep Dive webinar. Today we are super excited, and I'm personally grateful and honored to be able to share this information with you all and explore questions you may have about our 2024 PIT findings. My name is Kiki Sarantas. I use she and they pronouns. I am the planning manager at KCRHA. And later on during our panel discussion, we'll be joined by some of our data teams and our partner at University of Washington to help explore this data and the questions you might have. By the end of today's sessions, we hope you have a deepened understanding of the 2024 point in time count and increased access to this data that may be able to embolden any kind of planning, advocacy, or funding efforts in your neck of the woods. So before I dive in, some housekeeping. So you may have already noticed that this session is in a webinar format and it is recorded. We do intend to make it available to all of you who RSVP'd ahead of time, as well as on our website later on. This is a Q&A at the end. We will have one at the end. And so if you do have questions, please note that at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a Q&A button. You can submit your questions using this Q&A function at any time. The chat is disabled, so the Q&A will be the best way to get your questions to us if you're someone like me who needs to get them out of their brain and on paper, or they go away. Please note that our Q&A panelists here are experts on the point in time count. You may have questions that go beyond the point in time count, and we may not be able to answer those live, but we'll do our best to follow up as needed and connect you to the appropriate folks here at KCRHA. And as a reminder, for just general information, you can always reach out to us at info@kcrha.org. And if you're me and you want to dive into the more than 100 pages of the findings yourself, please go to kcrha.org. We have a whole page dedicated to the point in time count that is kept up to date. So with that housekeeping out of the way, let's go ahead and dive in. I want to start our session today, like all the work we do at King County Regional Homelessness Authority, by grounding us in our mission and our theory of change. At KCRHA, we believe that if we create a homeless response system that centers the voices of people with lived experience and homelessness, then we can focus on responding to the needs and eliminating inequities to ultimately end homelessness. Our mission statement is to administer effective performance-based homeless services to support a high-functioning homelessness crisis response system to significantly decrease the incidence of unsheltered homelessness across our county by centering equity and social justice principles. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge and recognize that King County is located on the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples. We honor this land and its people past and present, and we are committed to directing funding and resources to organizations led by and in support of Native and Indigenous peoples. So this is a little bit of a roadmap of how we're going to spend the next roughly hour and a half together. We're going to start by overviewing our Seattle King County 2024 Unsheltered Pit Comprehensive Report, point in time report, which I'll just call shorthand the pit count, the 2024 pit count. We're going to spend some time reviewing our point in time count methodology, some of the key findings, as well as some of our supplementary analyses that you can find in that report. And we'll close out with some next steps. So during the last 2 weeks of January 2024, KCRHA brought together more than 130 volunteers from across King County at 20 different locations, with the intent to hear the stories of our unhoused neighbors and their experiences of unsheltered homelessness and homelessness. This data was then compiled and calculated to represent a snapshot of time, which we call the point in time count or pit count. This report is a detailed account of these experiences, and I'm very honored, especially as someone with lived experience myself, to be able to bring this information forward to you all today. Through this data, this is just one of the ways that we are able to create pathways to hear the voices of those outside. So a couple things about what the PIT report is and isn't. This is a snapshot of one night of our system in King County and the functioning of our shelters and transitional programs. What the PIT doesn't do is it doesn't account for all the people experiencing homelessness throughout the year, and it doesn't account for work that providers and advocates like you all are doing day in and day out housing people. That would be a different type of analysis. What the PIT does do, or can do, I should say, is it does give us a marker of what a typical night, especially in the winter months, might look like. And it can allow for a year-to-year comparison and trends when the data is available. As many of you know, it is required by the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. Just framing the purpose a little bit more, the PIT provides the only detailed, neutral, complete report on unsheltered homelessness in King County, using the most accurate information available to us at this time. The goal for is for the data to be used to aid in our strategic planning for local government around resources, priorities, policies, and initiatives. It's also available to assist other communities who might be considering our methodology, and for us to continually improve and plan. So we're already planning for our 2026 point in time count. Considerable care was put in place when creating the analysis sections of this report to ensure accuracy and completeness. So here's kind of like an example. Here you can see on the slide the different sections reported on in the 2024 PIT count. Be sure to make sure you're reading the columns. Many studies are within this larger report. And we have breakdowns by subpopulations, veterans, youth households, etc. So you'll see things like subregional data, racial, more deep dives on racial and ethnic groups data, subpopulation data, health and well-being, and we're going to preview a lot of that with you all today. Each section includes a crosswalk of all available demographic data along with the comparisons to the totals. Each category is clearly labeled, enabling you as the reader to jump to the sections that you think are most relevant to your purposes. It's super, you can even go to the table of contents and see like what page number it is and just click on that and it will take you to the page you need to go. So we love that. And we have a conclusion that provides kind of overall summaries and next steps on how to best use this information. So all helpful information if you plan, which I encourage you to do, to dive deeper in on your own time. So let's talk a little bit about the methodology. KCRHA, we received approval from a HUD to conduct this 2024 unsheltered count using a methodology called respondent-driven sampling. This methodology is consistent with the same process we used in 2022, and it does have a proven track record for reaching people who are not already connected to services. It provides a valuable data point that can supplement data in the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, and other systems. RDS has been endorsed by numerous studies by academics, researchers, and the World Health Organization, really confirming its effectiveness in producing high-quality demographic and population estimates. It is the same methodology used as an industry kind of standard, including in a lot of the census work. So in 2022, before pivoting to this method, we used at KCRHA the similar method you may be more familiar with called the canvassing method. And in this methodology, the collection of demographic data happens separate from the count itself. It is understood to be an undercount and really difficult to estimate as it's dependent on volunteers going out and literally counting folks who are homeless, right, or experiencing homelessness. This can, as you can imagine, create some space for larger human error, and that comes from maybe some biases to a greater extent. And because volunteers have to literally count folks, participants are not given a choice to participate in that process. Like the RDS method, however, it is still a HUD-approved methodology that communities continue to use really across the nation. In comparison with our current model, the RDS methodology, as I mentioned, RDS is an industry standard method for census data collection on hard-to-reach populations. Here, the collection of demographic data and the count itself happens simultaneously rather than separate from each other. The sample is then grounded with the shelter data from both HMIS as well as a survey that is sent out to non-HMIS participating agencies. And participants are given a choice to participate and then compensated when they do. As I did note, it is a HUD-approved methodology. So how does it work? With this model, the first survey respondent is given a coupon from an outreach team member or provider with instructions on where to go and how to complete the survey, as well as a bus ticket. After completing the survey, they're then given a $20 gift card, and it's $40 for families, along with 3 additional coupons and bus tickets to distribute within their network, within their relationships that they hold, right? These respondents come to the hub site. Their coupon is then scanned, and that's able to connect the parent and the child surveys together, and it forms this chain. Then they are given 3 coupons, and if those return, the parent survey gets $5 additional gift cards for each survey that is submitted and returned. So what we're doing here is measuring the natural networks by asking participants to tap into the relationships into their community and assist with the recruitment. This then builds the chains or trees that you saw in this previous slide that allows us to map the relationships between people. The longer these chains are that are created tells us how dense that population is, or the population is. We then pair this with shelter data sets that allow us to then build out population estimates. Central to this methodology, as you can imagine, is the role of our survey sites, aka our hub sites. And here you can see a map of our hub sites for 2024 by subregions. Hub sites are critical for the subregion estimates, and we have a minimum of 1 hub site per subregion. The focus is on building out subregional data sets. And in 2024, we increased the number of hub sites from 9 to 20, including a family phone line in a Vashon Maury island to ensure a representative sample across our diverse county. As mentioned at the start, data collection occurs across a 2-week time period, so 10 business days, usually at the last chunk of January, pending any severe weather issues. And sub-regional data collection then allows research to gather a representative sample of unsheltered homelessness. So with that framing, I'm excited to dive more into our key findings. And as a reminder, you'll be able to find and reference the points discussed today, plus a whole lot more, over 100 pages of information that we won't have time to dig into. So I encourage you all to take a look at that on our website. So our 2024 point in time count efforts found that there were 16,868 people estimated to be experiencing homelessness in our county on a given night. Of this number, 77% identified as male, so men or boys. 30% were between the ages of 35 and 45, and 25% reported that their first experience of homelessness occurred before they turned 18. The report also found that 6,406 people are estimated to be experiencing chronic homelessness. So I want to pause and just share. We do use the HUD definition of chronic homeless, the federal definition from HUD. And so to meet this federal definition from HUD of chronic homelessness, a person must have a disabling condition that affects their ability to live independently, and a person's homelessness experience must be 12 or more months of a continuous homelessness in the last 3 years, or 4 or more separate episodes of homelessness where the total adds up to a year or more. So we want to clarify what we're talking about when we see that number. There were 7,947 shelter beds accounted for during the 2024 point in time count. From 2022 to 2024, in a 2-year time span, we saw an overall increase of 26% of people experiencing homelessness, moving us from around 13,000 individuals to around 16,000 individuals total across the region. You'll also notice that between 2022 and 2024, while there was an increase, the proportion between shelter and unsheltered remained relatively steady at about 60 to 40% split. We're seeing that there are 2.1 people in need of a bed for every 1 bed that is available on average across the region. With this data set, we were able to conduct analysis of resources per area, which was helpful to highlight why we're getting the 60-40 split mentioned in the slides, the last slide, and presented in a different way where people may experience the split differently when looking for resources in their area. Here we're seeing an average that, like I mentioned, 2 people per every shelter resource available, and you can then see how there continues to be discrepancies at the sub-regional level. Shelter resources are typically organized by household type. Breaking the data in this way helps us to see what would be available for someone experiencing homelessness by their household type. And again, the goal here isn't to compare the whole household type to another, but to evaluate each area separately with the goal to improve the system based on the household type. So single beds, there are 3,434, youth 279, and families 2,591. Another key finding is that homelessness on average is growing nationwide. We were able to review the data with the Annual Homelessness Assessment Report, or AHAR, produced by HUD to really try to understand how the 26% increase is situated in comparison with other continuum of cares across the country. This graph here shows the percent change for all COCs across the country between 2022 and 2024. It should be noted that there were some communities that saw decreases. And I should note too that each COC is unique. There are no quick or one-size-fits-all solutions to ending homelessness. So what works in some communities might not work in all. But as you can see, homelessness is on average growing across the nation. Additionally, homelessness continues to disproportionately impact communities of color in our region and beyond. So when looking at this graph here, this will show kind of how racial and ethnic disparities continue. Please note that the black bar that you see, that black line represents the US Census estimates. And the blue bar shows the PIT data estimates. And so when you see that the black bar is less than the blue bar, that's where we can see a overrepresentation of that population in homelessness for our county. So, for example, 15% of people experiencing homelessness in King County identify as Black or African American, but according to the 2023 US Census data, only about 7% of King County's population identifies as Black or African American. Similarly, we can see a discrepancy for American Indian, Alaskan Native, or Indigenous individuals, where 6% of people experiencing homelessness in our county identify as American Indian, Alaskan Native, or Indigenous, but that group only makes up less than 1% of the county's population. So it's vital for us to continue to recognize the role and the ways in which structural racism and racial inequities continue to impact homelessness in our community. In 2024, we saw a decrease of 98% for those who self-identified as transgender. And I want to take a moment to talk about how this is likely an undercount of the reality, especially given the nuances and complexities and the harm and risk that you put yourself at, especially nowadays when you self-identify your gender identity, especially if you are trans. It may not feel or be safe for these individuals to self-identify, especially in a survey setting with folks they just met. Considering this level of risk that already exists, that is just continuing to be heightened by political pressure. There was also a 58% change, so a decrease in drop in the number of unsheltered people who belong to households with children since 2022. This is different than what providers are observing and sharing with us. It may be indicative of the ways that families and children experience homelessness or show up in the survey kind of setting, right? We can think about things like work schedules, school schedules, etc. That might be barriers for folks coming to do a survey in winter, right? But this is a planned improvement area for 2026. So our team is already working with community members to identify ways to improve this with things like a family phone line to address this inconsistency. Health and well-being disparities persist for our unhoused neighbors, which can add to the barriers and challenges of finding or moving along a continuum towards stable housing. So some of those key findings include 51% of respondents experiencing unsheltered homelessness reported having a disability and living with a disability. 34% reported living with a serious mental illness. 47% reported living with substance use disorder. Some of the key takeaways, right? These findings suggest that many in this population experience really complex health challenges, which may not really be surprising to you given what we were just talking about with our rates of chronic homelessness and how we define that. Each time we do the PIT, we are continually improving our methodology, including how and what questions we're asking, and we're continuing to engage the community in those efforts to ensure we have the most robust understanding that we can. Domestic and gender-based violence continues to be a contributing factor for homelessness for those especially identifying as women. So 17% of all respondents reported domestic violence as a cause for their homelessness. And of all DV survivors, 57% identified as women. 41% of women experiencing unsheltered homelessness, did cite DV as primary cause. So that number is even greater when you look at that specificity. Excuse me. I do want to make a note on domestic violence too. Similarly, identifying yourself as somebody who is seeking safety from domestic violence comes with a level of risk and harm, right? Often we know this is undercounted, especially for men and for boys. Some folks don't realize what they're experiencing as domestic violence until years later, or at the very least, are not able to disclose that as they're actively seeking safety from their abusers, right? Many folks experiencing homelessness and instability can see that connection with that, right? This really underscores the need for trauma-informed, DV supportive services and programs for survivors. Another key finding is that many individuals use vehicles and RVs as shelters. So 27% reported living in vehicles not meant for human habitation, and 41% of those living in cars identify as women, which is higher than the overall. This might have some correlation with some of the information we're seeing around families and children and how they tend to operate while unhoused. Veterans continue to experience homelessness and have high rates of disabilities and substance use disorder. So some of the data we're seeing for that unique population, right? 80% ID as men, 48% reported living with a serious mental illness, 54 reported living with significant disability, and 44% reported a substance use disorder. Again, this suggests the necessity of healing-centered, trauma-informed services that really account for the complexities that this subpopulation is experiencing in our county. And one key finding that stands out particularly to us, I mean, they all do to us at KCRHA, but given our mission on unsheltered homelessness is the rates around unsheltered chronic homelessness. So at KCRHA, our ultimate goal is to decrease the incidence of unsheltered homelessness. The efforts to do this are closely tied with the reality that chronic homelessness is increasing. 66% of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness are defined as chronic by that HUD definition we shared at the start, and that's compared to 36% nationwide. This is a 117% increase since 2022 compared to a 36% increase nationwide. So focusing on unsheltered homelessness and chronic homelessness remains crucial. We also collected data from folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness on their last place of stable home, causes of homelessness, and emergent shelter wishes to help with immediate triage advocacy. So let's dive into some of that now. Of all the survey respondents, 821 responded to the question, what was the place of last stable housing, which is about 56% of all point-in-time respondents. So nearly 60% of those who responded to this question reported that they were last stably housed within our county, within King County. And the top two subregions identified were Seattle Metro at 26% and South King County at 23%. And there are various economic factors that were cited in response as key drivers of homelessness. So we want to share some of the top responses, and those emphasize losing work or loss of job and eviction as the main causes across the subregion. Eviction is double for the average population, and 1 in 2 people lost their jobs as to a reason why they're currently experiencing homelessness. We also surveyed what folks were looking for and seeking when it came to shelter. This information can help us understand how we can improve our existing shelter options in order to meet the unique needs and the complex needs that we've been discussing so far, and what to account for in any kind of expanded shelter options that may become available. As you can see, the top 2 service needs cited include easy enrollment and having personal space. Having personal space personally sticks out to me, especially since we've been talking about this earlier data around domestic violence and health and well-being factors and how those things are potentially correlated. So just to summarize some of our key learnings, data on the unsheltered homelessness matches what advocates and service providers like you all are witnessing and sharing with us firsthand. There are some regional and population-specific trends that remain crucial for us to track to ensure that our system is meeting the unique needs of everybody and those populations. Homelessness is the most difficult to get out of for those facing chronic health and disabling conditions. And so as we see those things increase, our solutions need to kind of get more creative and increase alongside them, right? Shelter and service resources continue to fall behind the number of people who need them. So flat out, we just need more shelter and service resources across the region. People who identify as male are making up most of those experiencing unsheltered homelessness according to the point in time count. So what's happening next? So we do the point in time count every 2 years, and our data and research team and with our partners at UW are already very much working hard and with planning efforts underway for a very smooth and robust 2026 point in time count. So far, we've already set up and have started and have convened the point in time continuum of care work group, which has approved us to continue using the RDS methodology. So after 2026 years, we'll actually have 3 different point in time counts using this methodology under our belts. Field testing of the survey and survey instrument is already underway. We're in the process of finalizing our hub sites, incorporating community feedback, not recommendations that some of you on this call have made to us, and going out and conducting site visits. And that should be concluded very shortly. We're continuing to improve our efforts to reach subpopulations. I've talked about some of those populations today, like families, but we're also focusing on unaccompanied minors in rural locations. So one exciting thing that we're exploring is having our first ever like mobile hub site as an example. And then one other kind of call to action is to be on the lookout for volunteer coordination. You could be one of those 130 people to help us get this information. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, just be on the lookout. Our sign up should be available in early November, and you will receive support from us at KCRHA and all of that great stuff. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen here shortly and move us into a question and answer panel. We want to hear from you on what questions you have. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask my panelists to introduce yourselves with just your name and what your role is within your related agency. So let me get that going. Let's start with you, Dr. Tim.
Thanks, Kiki. Great presentation. My name is Tim Thomas. I'm the new Chief Research and Data Officer at KCRHA. My pronouns are he and they. Passed off to Zach.
Hello, my name's Zach Almquist. I'm an associate professor in sociology at the University of Washington. I help lead the statistical analysis here, and my pronouns are he, him.
Okay. Janelle, would you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Thanks, Kiki. Janelle Rothrock, she, her. I'm the Senior Research Director here at KCRHA, helping this amazing team coordinate the 2026 PIT.
And next, let's do Ben.
Hello, I'm Ben Mathewson. I work as an analyst under Dr. Tim Thomas, Janelle Rothfolk, and with our data management team here at KCRHA, and my pronouns are he, him.
Thank you. And Ewan? We can't hear you, Ewan. That is okay. Ewan is our Director of Continuous Improvement on the Data and Research team, or Research and Data team. Ewan, if the mic works, you can interrupt us and introduce yourself. And we also have Lisa here, who's our Chief of External Affairs, who's helping with some of the logistical stuff. But I'm going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and I see some of the questions were already answered in the chat. I'm wondering, Ben, if maybe you can speak a little bit more to at least one of those questions. Can you talk more about the information around youth and young adults from the point in time count? Anything that you would want to say about that?
So this is another one of those populations that the RDS methodology is sort of designed to reach because it can be a very difficult or hard to reach segment, as you can imagine when it comes to administering face-to-face surveys. Another thing that potentially complicated the data collection for the 2024 report is that we weren't able to survey anyone 18 or under directly because of the issue of obtaining rather informed consent for those surveys. So this was estimated in part based on surveys from family units and information that we were able to get from our homelessness management information system. Zach, I think, is that pretty spot on?
Yeah, that's very well said, Ben. We are in the process of getting IRB approved surveys for the under 18 population. And so we'll be directly surveying them this year.
Great. I'm going to pause now and welcome, if you do have a question, you can pop them in the chat. I'm seeing one from Amy, but before I read that out loud, I would just like to let folks know you're also welcome to raise your hand, and you will have up to 2 minutes to ask your question to us using that format if the typing thing isn't working out. So I see, Ben, you're responding to this question now. I'm just going to read it out loud as well. Question about the decline in the identification of trans folks in the 2024 PID. How much of this might be due to the RDS approach, and could targeted outreach to trans communities help address this? I see Ben is typing, but I'll open the floor to our panelists if you have any additional thoughts on that question. Great. We have one raised hand, so we'll call on you next.
I'll jump in to actually ask Zach to answer this question, but it's uncertain, to be honest with you, some of why this is, but I don't know, Zach, if you have a better answer than that.
I would say one thing to keep in mind is we had a large increase of the number of people experiencing homelessness from 22 to 2024. And so some of it may just represent the larger community rather than an actual decrease in the number of people who identify as trans.
And then Ben, if you wanted to say anything about the response you put in the chat, but if not, no worries. It seems pretty thorough.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that we used the RDS methodology both in 2022 and in 2024. So where you see numbers compared in the report year over year, those are the 2 years we're comparing. And we're doing that specifically because we trust that the way in which the data were collected and extrapolated are similar enough that we can have an apples to apples comparison between the two. That doesn't necessarily account for other conditions that can influence a person's willingness to self-report, especially when we're talking about particularly difficult or fraught categories.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to raise up too what Troy said in the chat, in the Q&A. I would assume that the national rhetoric has increased the likelihood that trans folks don't feel safe disclosing that part of their identity.
And we're not here to confirm that or deny that. I just had to put that out there as someone who's objectively an analyst, but that is a reasonable hypothesis. Let's put it that way.
Right. Lisa, you mentioned there was someone with their hand raised, so I want to make space for them now.
Yes, it was Erica Barnett. You had your hand up, but you took it down. So if you want to speak, can you raise it again?
Oh, I see it in the chat now.
There it is. Okay, I'm gonna allow you to talk. You can ask, you can unmute yourself, Erica.
You should be able to unmute yourself now. Okay.
There we go.
Hi,
Okay.
sorry for the confusion.
No,
I typed it up in the chat while I was raising my hand, but basically that's my question. That the PIT last stably housed data is being used to extrapolate that 70% of people in Seattle are not from here, essentially. Without getting into the politics of that kind of statement, I'm just trying to understand, my understanding is that was not subjected to respondent-driven sampling, and it's just raw data of a couple hundred people or so. And so I'm wondering, A, is that true? I see nodding. And then B, how much can we tell from that data? And is it enough to extrapolate that 70%? I mean, it's just a little inconsistent with previous surveys. So I'm wondering how reliable a statement like that is to gauge the total number of people who are homeless in Seattle, but aren't quote unquote from here.
I see you unmuted, Dr. Tim, so I'd love to throw it over to you first.
Yeah, I'm going to give a very unsatisfying answer in that this is actually something that we're looking at right now, at exactly if we could get at some sort of number like that, because part of it's true, part of it's not so true, and so we want to kind of help clarify exactly what that might be. And like I said, that's a very unsatisfying answer at this moment, but soon we'll have a report on Mayor Harrell's question on that.
And I would also say the time from which the survey was conducted and the point at which they were last stably housed is not represented in this data. And so that there could be potentially large intervals of time from when they were last stably housed to when the survey is conducted. And Janelle, I see you've unmuted as well.
Yeah, I was just going to make that same point. And just to point out the large increase in the number of people experiencing chronic homelessness, we're using the HUD definition for that. So that is 3 or more or 4 or more episodes within a time period. And so given that, it could have been 3 or more years ago since the person last had stable housing. So yeah, so I would say that I would take this data point more at face value and not, I wouldn't, I don't think that the intent of having this out was to sort of make any further inferences.
Thank you. All right. I'm also looking, I see a question. The increase in unsheltered chronic homelessness from 117% from 2022 to 2024 is huge. Is this too large of an increase to accurately reflect the scale of a 2-year change? What should we be making of this? So I'll open that up. Ben, I saw you were typing. Maybe you want to start us off.
Yeah, first, just to refer you to the right page on the report, you'll want to look at page 54 of the report. Then we actually do the same thing. We place that statistic among the rest of the figures that were obtained for COCs across the nation. On average, nationwide, for the distance between, or for the time between 2022 and 2024, we observed a 36% increase among people experiencing chronic and unsheltered homelessness at the same time. Our number is obviously high, so we sit on the high end of the distribution. Unfortunately, we don't sit there alone. This is a number we're looking into more closely, and one of the figures that we looked into especially carefully as we started planning for this next process is obviously we have a community interest here in making sure that these are accurate, and this number does appear to be accurate.
Thank you. I'm going to ask this question next. I'm wondering about the KCRHA plans to address the 2.1 people in need for shelter bed for every 1 bed available. This is a big issue. Even before this data came out, we knew we had a gap that persisted across the region with sub-regional differences. We are currently working on an addendum to our 5-year plan, but we do have a 5-year plan that is on our website that partially intends to kind of address some of these issues. But the thing I want to say before opening it up is it is going to take a community-wide approach. We all have a unique kind of role in the system, and funding obviously is pretty limited right now, and it's going to continue to be a barrier. And I know Dr. Tim and his team has been doing a lot of work kind of projecting and looking at that moving forward. But I know it's probably not a super satisfactory response, but to note that it is and remains a vital priority for us here at KCRHA. So I'll open the floor to see if there's other thoughts on that. Great.
I think one of the things that KCRHA is looking at is as we kind of take a sub-regional approach is like, how can we make sure that there's resources in the community where people are experiencing homelessness. And so our research and data team is looking about how we can, better conceptualize that information and get that out to policymakers.
And if I could, oh, sorry, Kiki, just to add one thing that you had mentioned about forecasting and trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit. We've been working with Professor Almquist on looking at projections as well as taking into account some of the threats that have been coming from the federal government about in terms of what's affecting continuum of care, Section 8, and also just generally what's anticipated down the pipeline as changes in the Department of Housing and Urban Development kind of come about. And I am very keen on trying to at least say forecasting is a forecast, right? It's not exactly what's going to happen, but it helps us kind of prepare for what might be coming down the line. So over the next month, we'll be releasing some information on this potential impacts, both locally, just from general increases, population increase, the housing market has an impact, but in addition, what might be happening because of COC, continual care, or Section 8 cuts, or effects on other populations that are precarious. So be on the lookout for that in the future soon.
All right. Thank you. We have a question around how would you like to see the religious centers, NGOs evolve and evolve and involved in 2026. One thing I can say is that tapping into all of our partners, regardless of their status, like what they're focused on, is really crucial. We've seen a lot of success in things like severe weather coordination, where we have our religious partners and NGOs like really stepping up and like helping like streamline and align that processes across the region. And so I think we're going to have to get creative. We're going to have to think outside of the box. And more importantly, we're all going to have to work together in different ways than maybe we have in the past, given the mounting issues that we're seeing, the lack of funding, all of that stuff, and just the importance of addressing this increase. Kind of a recommendation that I want to share with folks. If you do have additional thoughts and recommendations that might not be questions, you can reach out to us at info@kcrha.org. But why don't we connect people to shelter beds as they come into the hubs or have case managers on standby? Janelle's responding to that in the chat. I'll make space for you, but I think one thing to know is that we have a lack of beds and units as well, but go ahead, Janelle.
Yeah, so we've been really cognizant of keep the survey staff that are coming in and volunteering aren't case managers, and so we don't want to portray that they would be, you know, a connection for resources, just to make sure that we're being very clear in our relationship with the person as we're doing the interview. With that said, we look at sites that have connections that we can then build them or connect them back to our homeless response system. And so the libraries that we work with, they typically have peer coordinators at some of the King County libraries. So working to make sure we're at some of those, working with those peer outreach workers to know when we're going to be doing the surveys. Same thing at food banks and other day centers, making sure that there's staff on site that if they'd like to talk to someone that we can direct them to that resource. We think that would be a more appropriate referral in that way. But open to, you know, ideas or any other suggestions that you guys would have.
And I just add, that's why it has been so vital to have community participation over the last few years in identifying our hub sites, in in helping us figure out, right? So if we can situate the surveys in locations that our experts are skilled in that kind of thing, then we can streamline it a little bit more.
We're also doing that with our mobile sites too. We're going to coordinate with other outreach providers and also other mobile hubs that are going out already, like public health, DSHS, etc. So we can have that resource connection if they would like.
Great. We have a question in the chat, kind of in the same spirit. Are there agreements between KCRHA and the hub sites that encourage referrals and partnerships? Last year, the hub site wouldn't provide referrals or blankets to any survey participant that asked. Ben, I see you're responding to that, but if you want to go ahead and take that.
I think Janelle or Ewan can talk more about the agreements that we're putting in place, but it's not the nature of those agreements is not to put the host site in any way under obligation to provide certain things for respondents. And I think as someone who volunteered during the 2024 count and was on ground for several of these sites, it's difficult to create in them sort of a one-stop shop where everyone's needs can be met all the time. That's an emotional challenge for the surveyors as much as it's a discouragement for the people who are answering the survey if they get the impression that that's what they're coming for. But logistically, it's a very complicated thing to be able to, move from surveying somebody getting the data to placing them in an enrollment line. And you don't want to put that burden on your host site either, since we're relying on being able to do this on a day when they're already doing business with a number of other people seeking similar services. So you don't want to create these waves of demand and sort of crush them under that workload. But I'll defer the rest of that answer to Janelle and Ewan.
Yeah, we are working on hub agreements. So that's correct to kind of outline that partnership. This year we're also offering, financial assistance to account for the additional traffic that could be coming into the site. So sometimes more people might stick around for the evening meal, for example. And so making sure that there's enough food and plates and stuff like that in those situations. So really making sure that what's critical is really having that partnership with that hub and KCRHA and having those expectations set so that it's very clear when the person is coming in to do the survey what they're walking into. And so we've been working really hard on that. We have some hubs that were started in 2022 sites that will continue in 24 and are signing up again for 26. And so we're excited to be able to continue to build on that relationship.
We've reached the end of the questions submitted on the pit in our Q&A. So I want to just open it up one more time for anyone who would like to come off mute. Please raise your hand and we can coordinate that. Going once, going twice. Sold. Okay, well, thank you so much. I think this will conclude our webinar on the 2024 point in time deep dive. Please note that we will be working to get this posted and sent to you all who RSVP'd ahead of time, this recording. And then be on the lookout. We are very serious about our pit stuff here and very excited for 2026 and always down to have a conversation with like-minded folks who are passionate about solving this issue in our community. So thank you for your time, for your questions, and I hope you have a great weekend, a good rest of your Friday. Thanks all.